Dad was rendered permanently disabled at the age of 56. And as the eldest sibling and the next woman in line after my mum left, I've been caring for him in various capacities since I was around 15 years old. And based on chats I've had with others around my age, I know that I'm not the only young person to have done so, because 8 times more people are hurt in rural industries than in any other industry nationwide. And a staggering 93% of them are men. When my dad passes away, he won't be accounted for in these statistics because probably like many other rural blokes you know, he'd rather stick a pen in his eye than talk about his suffering. Because he's tough as nails and because he wouldn't want people to fuss. The problem here is even bigger than we think it is. But what if he was compliant? Would that change where he is today? Compliance is a dirty word. Compliance with work health and safety legislation is more often than not assimilated with paperwork, penalties, policies and procedures. Box ticking, dust collecting, perceived as costly and convoluted, and yet we forget that the intent of compliance is simply just don't kill anyone. Now, I'm incredibly fortunate to be a co-investigator on a research project with a Doctor of Sociology that's allowed me to look into what's been done over the years on an international scale to try and prevent people from getting hurt in rural industries. And what we've found, which will probably come as no surprise, is that most of what's been done has come in the form of training, seminars, and fact sheets about safety equipment. Which leads me to my next point, which is that these fact sheets, whilst very well intended, have done 2/5 of 5 parts of bugger all in actually reducing the number of people hurt. So something's obviously not working. But yeah, we've been down this road before. Because guess what, ladies and gentlemen, 30 years ago, nobody wore seatbelts. Drink driving was as common as a farmer whinging about the weather, and smoking was still an accessory. So what's changed? It's now socially unacceptable to partake in these things. Our individual belief systems on what is okay versus what is not okay have changed. And let me give you the hot tip. It's not because we read a fact sheet, and it's not because we sat in the classroom for an hour. It's not because we followed a procedure, nor is it because we might get a slap over the wrist from the local copper. We have been influenced by those around us to make smarter, safer, and healthier choices. So before I get too carried away on my safety soapbox up here, I know what some of you might be thinking. But isn't it law to have records and to have safety procedures? And don't we have to cover our arse? And what if the regulator comes knocking on the door? Won't I get in trouble? That poor bloke down the road whose worker had an accident, the first thing the regulator asked for was paperwork. Well, allow me to enlighten you, ladies and gentlemen. There is literally not one line in the 601 pages of work health and safety legislation that says you need to have a procedure. It's thrilling reading. I highly encourage you all to read it. And further to that, any competent inspector, auditor or consultant will tell you that the best evidence of compliance is when a person can competently show you and tell you how to do a job safely. And better still, when nobody gets hurt in the first place. See, the thing is that there's a common misperception that to have safety paperwork is to be compliant. And furthermore, that means you're being safe. And in reality, paperwork, not to mention high-vis vests, gloves and signage, are merely a last line of defence, which is why it's explicitly reinforced in legislation that when managing a risk, you need to do so in order of effectiveness, which is otherwise referred to in legislation as the hierarchy of controls. Anyway, you see what I'm saying. So just to put the sprinkles on the donut here this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, given I myself was guilty of having spent the first 7 years of my 13-year career in safety focused on paperwork, policies and penalties, and I really believed my own rubbish, to be honest, and I totally understand how uncomfortable this might be for some of you. I've been straight to the horse's mouth. I've spoken to the Executive Director of Safe Work SA, Mr. Martin Campbell, And I had him sign off on this approach. I don't expect you to be able to read that, but it pretty much says I'm right. So what now? You see, ladies and gentlemen, the opportunity for everyone that works within, alongside, or even on the peripheral of rural industries, that's everyone in here, is to focus much, much less on paperwork and much, much more on having great conversations about work health and safety, on turning up the volume on what's already working well within rural industries, because most of the time things actually do go right and people don't get hurt, and on encouraging farmers, fishers and pastoralists to take practical, meaningful action on the things that could actually save a life. Vaccinations against Q fever, more regular comms for remote work, guards around augers, and conversations about mental health. So today, I challenge you to stop and to just think differently about work health and safety in the context of rural industries, or in any industry really. Because let's be honest, we are all human, and scaring the bejesus out of people, particularly small family businesses, about paperwork, policies, penalties, injury stats, fatalities, and just how terrifying it must be to work on the farm or on a boat, hardly screams support and encouragement. Now, does it? Ladies and gentlemen, 30 years ago, nobody wore seatbelts, and today we do it without even thinking about it. So I want you to talk to your colleagues, to your family, your friends on the farm, your neighbour, your kids, the bank, the insurance agent, especially the industry association, anyone and everyone, about what good work health and safety really looks like. And if you do happen to have a conversation with someone who works in rural industries, ask questions, plant a seed for safety, and turn up the volume on what's already working well. Start a conversation that will eventually make it universally not cool for those in rural industries to be unsafe or to take shortcuts. And since there's no way in hell a procedure, a fact sheet, or belting my old man over the head with injury or fatality statistics would have influenced him to make smarter, safer, or healthier choices about his exposure to Q fever, his decision to work himself into the ground, or his tough as nails mentality. As my legacy to my mum, my dad, our industry, and our way of life, plant a seed for safety, and for God's sake, save a life, listen to your wife. Thank you.